Hey guys, welcome to the channel. Hey, first of all, I want to say, everyone that's been watching my Pokemon Pocket content, I really appreciate you. Those of you that, you can go look at my comments. Those of you that have known me from several different games, Vainglory, Auto Chess, Warcraft Rumble, TFT, gosh, Command & Conquer Rivals, Eve Online, or not even Eve Online. What was the blinking Eve mobile version? Eve Echoes. For those of you that have watched me through all of the different types of games that I've done on this channel, I have so much love for you guys. I love it when a comment pops up and says, I remember watching you 5 years ago doing auto chess. I'm so glad you're now creating content in a game that I'm playing again. That to me makes me feel really good because I've never really hit it big on YouTube. And I've never found a game that has had long-term success. The reason I've switched so many games is because the games do well and then they drop and then they eventually die out. Every single one of the games that I've covered has probably died out in some way, shape or form. Rumble's still going, but obviously not as big as it was when it launched. So anyone that's watching me for Pokemon Pocket, you guys are awesome. I want to keep doing it. I'm really enjoying the game. You'll know that I generally tend to work in waves of enthusiasm. And when I'm really enthusiastic about a game, I make loads of content for it. And that's kind of what I'm doing right now. Hey, enough of all the wishy-washy pre-talk. Let's get into the video. What we're doing today is we're going to look at the top 10 cards, in my opinion, in Pokemon Pocket. What I'm looking for in a top 10 card. Either a card that is so impactful it makes bad cards good, a card that is meta-defining, or a card that has like use across so many decks that it's just a great card in its own right. That includes trainer cards, by the way. So there is going to be some familiar faces in here that you're like, of course this is a top 10 card. But I have to include them, otherwise people will be like, where's this card? So I'm going to kick things off with Blaine. Blaine is, in my opinion, one of the top 10 cards in the game, simply because there is an entire deck that revolves around him. The fact that Blaine exists means that Ninetales, Rapidash are usable. Otherwise, those cards would not be usable. Blaine is also slowly creeping up in terms of tier list, and the entire deck is centered around this guy. So I'm putting him at number 10, just because I genuinely believe he's a great card. Great card because he makes an entire deck actually competitive. That's why I've included Blaine at this level. Because without Blaine, your Ninetales is useless, your Rapidash is practically useless. Blaine makes those competitive with some of the top tier decks, and even better than some of the top tier decks because it is so quick compared to other decks. You know, if you get Ninetales with 2 energy on, or Rapidash out with 1 energy on, I believe, and then you use Blaine, you are doing 30 extra damage, which is pretty crazy with those Pokemon. It makes Ninetales super competitive with things like Pikachu, where you can basically one-shot Pikachu straight away. And so yeah, it makes that deck really strong. Also because you have multiple copies and then none of them are EX Pokemon, you know, you have the ability to tank a hit, jump in, hit really big. There is more flexibility with this deck than running an EX deck, for instance. So that's why I really like Blaine. And he would be my sort of number 10 choice. Let's jump in to number 9. X Speed speaks for itself. Now, the reason X Speed is the lowest of my trainer cards is because it's not absolutely necessary in every deck. I think you ought to include it in most decks because the ability to reduce retreat costs is really important. However, you know, on things like Starmie deck, Starmie's got a free retreat cost. So you're never going to be using X Speed in that scenario. You may use X Speed to get a swapped in card out for Starmie, but yeah, ultimately X Speed, super useful card. Not much more to say about it. It is a pretty much an auto include in every single deck. One of the most useful trainer items, and you can stack it as well, which means you can get a 2 reduction in retreat cost. Basically makes like those big heavy Pokemon like the Charizards, for instance, the Mewtwo's, you can get them out for either free or 1, which is great. You know, like that's exactly what you need in certain scenarios. So X Speed is really, really important. And yeah, one of the most important cards in the game, which is why I'm including it up there as one of the top 10 kind of meta-defining, deck-defining cards, because it is always included. If you don't include X Speed, you are at a disadvantage in most matchups. So therefore, it has to go on my top 10 list. Now, I actually remember the video where I was like, I don't know if I really rate Sabrina that highly. I was talking at my ass. I have no idea. I don't even know why I said that now. Sabrina is insane. There are so many moments where you can clutch out a win through Sabrina. I would say that Sabrina is much more useful on the offensive when you're looking to secure a win than she is on the defensive. There are very few times where you defensively want to swap out the enemy's Pokemon. Unless you're swapping in a Pokemon with a very high retreat cost. But they often get to choose. That's one of the problems, that if you force them to choose, or you give them the option to choose when they're in a good spot, you'll find that the Sabrina is less effective. I haven't got many times where I've kind of looked back at Sabrina and said, yeah, using her defensively in this situation was a good choice, or even just using her defensively was definitive. However, there are so many times where I've used Sabrina to make them swap in a Pokemon. Like, let's say they've got a really beefy frontline EX Pokemon that I just can't get through, and it looks like they're about to turn the tide of the battle in their favor. I then ask them to swap out for a basic Pokemon, and I get that final last point. That's where Sabrina becomes really useful, in my opinion. And really, really important, you'll find that most decks run at least one copy of Sabrina, if not two, which makes her a very, very strong inclusion in most decks. And I would say, meta defining. You have to play around. The way I say it is that you have to play around, if you can, play around Sabrina. There isn't always the opportunity to, but you have to be aware that Sabrina can exist, and therefore when you're thinking about win conditions, you're always thinking about whether Sabrina can affect the game. And that is why I include Sabrina kind of in this top 10 list at number 7. Maybe a little low, but again, as I've stated, she's not as strong in defensive situations where you're losing. She's much better in securing the win, and in offensive situations where you have the upper hand, she's less impactful in defensive situations. Next one could be an interesting one. I'll see how you guys feel about it. It's the promo Mankey, not specifically normal Mankey, the promo Mankey. The reason that the promo Mankey is, in my opinion, a top 10 card in the game right now is because it basically created a deck. Primeape was not a deck before Promo Mankey came in, and the reason Promo Mankey has made this a deck is because it deals 10 damage to itself for 1 energy. You then evolve it to Primeape. Primeape is then already damaged. It has a damage counter on it, and that increases the damage that Primeape does to 100. So you have a practically guaranteed 100 damage stage 1 evolution Pokemon, which is nigh on difficult to come by without using some kind of supporter cards. Ninetales is 90, but it discards an energy, and obviously would then need Blaine to go up to 120. So Primeape at just 100 as a stage 1 Pokemon, even though it's damaged, fantastic. Obviously less impactful because sometimes you'd have to soak a hit from the enemy. But with Mankey, deals damage to itself, evolves to Primeape, that damage counter stays on, and then you get the 100 damage. It has become an A tier, potentially S tier deck, depending on how you play it. And it's all because of this one card. This one card basically changed the meta. In fact, if anything, out of all of the promo cards that were available in the Lapras event, Mankey was the single most impactful, in my opinion. I think Mankey was much better than Lapras EX. I think actually Lapras EX is actually relatively meh. So Mankey is fantastic. Obviously weak to the Mewtwo deck, but actually can outpace the Mewtwo deck. That's one of the great things about Mankey, is that you can outpace the Mewtwo deck before it's able to evolve to a Gardevoir and start churning energy onto its Mewtwo. So yeah, my view on Mankey, that's my view on Mankey. Here we go, number 5. It is, I think it's number 5. Have I done number 5? Yeah, no, this is number 6, I think. Wait a second, can I count? I can't count. It's number 5. Weezing. So, obviously, I'm going to put this in context of Weezing plus Koga. I couldn't put them together, and I don't think Koga himself is... So I think you can run Weezing without Koga. I think you can run Weezing without Koga. Weezing is a great stall Pokemon in decks that maybe you don't want to run Koga in, but it becomes less useful without Koga. So I'm putting in the context of this is Weezing plus Koga. Koga itself, super specialized, not a particularly strong card outside of pairing up with Weezing. Weezing can technically be used by itself, not as strong without Koga though. Basically, it is a splash package, a splash stall package for practically any deck in the game. What you can do with Weezing is you drop Coughing, you drop Weezing, you don't need any dark energy whatsoever, you drop it in the active slot and you poison the enemy Pokemon. It has 110 HP, can withstand most one-shots unless you're looking at big EX Pokemon one-shots. Pikachu's not going to kill it in one, Starmie's not going to kill it in one, so it can eat a couple of the aggro decks early damage over 2 turns, and it can poison that active Pokemon, forcing the enemy to either switch it out or just soak the damage. Obviously, with Starmie decks, Starmie EX decks can switch out for free. But Pikachu, you know, they'd have to spend an energy on getting them back in, and then spend an energy on then bringing them back into the active slot on the next turn as well. So that's always worth considering. Additionally, with Koga, you can circumvent the retreat cost. If you've got damage on Weezing, it will cancel the damage. You then put Coffin back in. You then, again, re-evolve to Weezing. You can basically soak hits for free, and it's a completely awesome stool package that can help you prevent you from dying and allow you to ramp up one of your more important Pokemon that's going to suddenly sort of take over the game. Weezing is great in that reason, and it has its own standalone deck, Weezing Arbok, where you can poison with Weezing, Koga, bring in the Arbok, and then basically lock them in place so that they can't retreat. And that is, again, one of the... Drinking my water because I've been talking for too long straight. One of the great things about Weezing, has its own deck that is, I think most people consider S tier. I underrated it massively in my tier list. I'm not going to make that mistake again. And as its own standalone package is absolutely fantastic. Weezing is a great card, really, really good card, and somewhat meta defining. So there you go. I'm going to say that. Jumping in at number 4 is Starmie EX. Starmie is absolutely fantastic. It is a meta-defining card in its own right. It's a pretty good splash package in a lot of water decks. You can run it as a very early aggro tool or a stalling tool in a lot of water decks. People run it alongside Articuno X. I've seen people run it in a Blastoise package. It's generally just a really, really strong EX card in its own right. I mean, you look at the stats, it is 130 HP. So can resist quite a lot of one-shots in the game. A 2 energy, flat 90 damage, good against a lot of the fire decks in the meta, and has a 0 retreat cost. So it can get away from being poisoned, can get away from, obviously if it's asleep, a little bit less, can't get away, but regardless, a fantastic, fantastic card that is so easy to play. So easy to get onto the board and so easy to play, and can essentially do what Pikachu does, at the same energy cost, but not require any Pokemon on the bench. The only reason it's lower than Pikachu in the meta is because Pikachu's electric and Starmie is water. So the actual matchup into Pikachu is worse. But it has more HP, and as we mentioned, it can retreat for free. 2 damage guaranteed, 2 energy guaranteed, 90 damage. It's fantastic card. Only needs one Staryu to evolve from, so there isn't any kind of like major sort of stage 2 evolution barriers to get to. It's just literally a stage 1 evolution, 130 HP. Obviously not as tanky as most other EX Pokemon, but it's not designed to be. It's supposed to be a hit and run type Pokemon. You hit, you jump out of a bad situation with the retreat, you jump back in, you hit again, you jump out of a bad situation with the retreat, etc. It is a great card. Speaking of EX Pokemon, should we go up to our number 3? Or number 4? Number 4. Oh, no, guys, I've realised Weezing was 6. So it was Blaine 10, X-Speed 9, Sabrina 7, Mankey 6, Weezing 5, Starmie 4. Oh, no, I'm doing the top 11. Right. Do you know what, guys? I'm doing the top 11. I realise I've chosen 11 cards rather than 10. So we're just going to pretend like this is the top 10 for the sake of a title. But what we're really doing is the top 11 cards. I just can't count. Mewtwo is my number 3 if you're counting it from 10, number 4 if we're counting it from my 11. Mewtwo is, again, it's a deck that's built entirely around Mewtwo. Needs support to make it work. However, is an absolute powerhouse. You know, there are lots of stall tactics that you can use in Mewtwo. And obviously using Gardevoir as kind of like that front line and then leveling it up. Once you get Gardevoir online, Mewtwo X is practically unstoppable by anything other than maybe like a Venusaur or a Charizard. Anything that just can't get one-shot. Mewtwo can one-shot the majority of Pokemon in the game, and with Giovanni can one-shot things like Executor as well. So Mewtwo is a fantastic Pokemon that has an entire deck built around it, and actually, you know, sort of fits really well into the meta overall. I think people are kind of dropping off Mewtwo in terms of it being the absolute best deck in the game. It does require some setup to get there. However, it's quite consistent. And, you know, there are lots of stall tactics that you can use. Even if you don't get the Gardevoir line, you can just kind of drop Mewtwo on your bench and start stacking up. Once you get that one side drive online, things start to become really easy in the game. You just need to get that side drive online and suddenly things start popping off. Can lose out to aggro decks, which is why aggro decks are coming up in the meta. But the argument that I'll make here is that Mewtwo made aggro decks good because people needed aggro decks to deal with Mewtwo. It single-handedly made the push for people to start more actively looking for aggro decks that can put pressure on Mewtwo before it ramps up. But yeah, great deck, has an entire deck built around it, defined a meta at the very start of Pokemon Pocket, and so therefore I'm going to include it quite high on my list. Going over to number 3/2, depending on how we're now following, Pokeball. Really simple. It's a great trainer card, and there's multiple reasons this is good. Firstly, it's guaranteed card draw, guaranteed to get you a basic Pokemon, which can be useful for keeping your presence on the bench, and it thins your deck out. You can use multiple of them per turn, and more importantly, like I said, thinning the deck means that you're going to remove a card that is going to be less impactful for you, but also obviously you can get on the bench, especially if you're mid-game. Even if you don't want that basic Pokemon, what it's doing is it's making sure that your next draw, you're not as likely to pull a useless card. Because once you're in the mid game and you haven't got a huge amount of need for basic Pokemon, it's one of those things where it will literally pull that out of your deck. So the next card you draw is a lower chance of you drawing a basic Pokemon on a natural draw. There's nothing worse than drawing a basic Pokemon in mid game on a natural draw when you don't need it, and when you have Pokeballs in hand, because then you have nothing to pull from. So it's a great in that card. Any kind of consistent card draw that is low risk is really, really, really important. Obviously, Meowth. I think Meowth is slightly underrated. It is a basic Pokemon that has one energy card draw, but obviously that means you have to commit to having Meowth in your deck, and it doesn't really do anything other than do some card draw for you. And there are lots of other card draw cards in the game, but Pokeball is a great, great card and auto-include in practically every deck. Number 2/almost number 1, Pikachu EX. Probably the strongest deck in the meta right now, and the reason this is the strongest deck in the meta right now is Pikachu EX is a basic Pokemon. It requires no evolution to work. You can shove your deck with any basic electric Pokemon, which makes it extremely accessible and easy to play. You do not need a specific deck list to make Pikachu work. Voltorb and Electrode, obviously kind of a go-to in terms of backup, and then Zapdos EX. But if you don't have Zapdos EX and you don't have Voltorb and Electrode, you can just put whatever electric Pokemon you've got, because it doesn't matter half the time. You put Pikachu down, you spam your bench with basic Pokemon, and then you put 2 energy on Pikachu and start hitting people for 90 over and over again. Can get going from turn 2 if you have the right type of cards on your bench. People now build decks that are designed specifically to tank and deal with Pikachu. Looking at one-shot capabilities for Pikachu. Ninetales can one-shot Pikachu. Meltan and Melmetal can one-shot Pikachu, etc. So people are looking at options that can one-shot Pikachu. But it's sort of probably the most meta-defining EX card in the game right now. I'm happy to be contested on that, but it's just my personal opinion. Really, really fantastic card. Great deck. Consistent deck. Most importantly, a consistent deck. One of the things that lets most decks down in Pokemon is the consistency of them. And Pikachu X is one of the most consistent decks in the game. And you very rarely get bricked by draw on Pikachu X decks. Especially if you're running the Zapdos variants, you have an alternative win condition. And drumroll. The final card, the top card in the game for me, it's this fucking old dude, Professor Oak. As many of you that play TCGs know, apart from Hearthstone, even in Hearthstone, card draw is extremely important. It does what it do. I play Pot of Greed. But yeah, anyone that knows TCG will know that card draw is extremely important. A throwaway card that draws 2 cards for no downside when your deck is made up of 20 cards. It draws 10% of your deck, or your base deck anyway, is insane. Especially if you pull it in the early game. It's a throwaway 2-card draw with absolutely 0 downside. The only downside this card has is in the late game. If you use it, you couldn't use things like a Sabrina or a Giovanni because it's a trainer card. It's a supporter trainer card. So yeah, it's absolutely crazy good. auto include in practically every single deck, which is, well, I don't think you could build a deck without it. You can make arguments that you might not build a deck with Pokeball, or you may not build a deck with X Speed, even though you would do. But yeah, it's sorry for the Slack notifications. I can't even bother to get rid of them now. Sorry if I triggered you and I thought you thought you were at work, because I know I do that all the time. This goes in every single deck. It is the most pivotal card in the entire game. You know, you would be at a serious disadvantage in every matchup in the game if you didn't run this card. Period. You have to run this card. It's non-negotiable. It is the only, in my opinion, absolute non-negotiable card in the game. I think there is a case to be made about practically any other card in the right situation. A lot of them are like 95% non-negotiable. This one is 100% non-negotiable. You cannot run a deck without Professor's Research. It is the most important card in the game, and therefore I'm saying it's my #1 most impactful Pokemon card in Pokemon Pocket. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you soon.